Now, hang on a moment. What are we talking about? You might be asking, race review? What race? What is this going on? You might be saying that this is very close to being a farce, or perhaps it even is. But we're still going to try for something. We're still going to try for a race review right here on the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits To Podium. And yes, even though we might have barely seen the cars on the track, there's a lot to talk about, and this is what we're going to do for today. Firstly, we discuss could the FIA have done anything different. Then, of course, discuss half points for no race. Does that even make any sense at all? The implications from the Spa Grand Prix, whatever racing we saw, can be also discussed. More on George Russell, followed by the stats review by Sundaram. And you might be saying, well, barely any cars, what stats review are you talking about, Soumil? Generally, there are some frightening ones right here. And finally, here's a bit of a quirky one. Entertainment ideas for long breaks like this one, much like Brazil 2016 or even Qatar 2018. So let's not waste any more time, much like we did early on in the day. So let's actually get on going and discuss all of it on the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits To Podium. Here we are then. Welcome along, folks. My name is Soumil Arora, host of The Driving Force on Disney Plus Hotstar, joined by Kunal Shah, the former marketing head of the Force India Formula One team. Again, Kunal, we've wasted a lot of time today, but I think the essence of it is that rain gods just weren't happy today. But many are wondering, does it even matter if the rain gods are unhappy? Formula One is the bravado sport, right? The machismo sport where you can go racing even though it's wet.
Well, I don't know where to start, Soumil, because I'll put it this way. We are calling this a Grand Prix review podcast, but we actually did not have a Grand Prix, right? We did not have a race, but half points were awarded. We had a podium ceremony. We had a national anthem. We actually had Nikita Mazepin been awarded or classified as the fastest lap of the day, the driver who had the fastest lap of the day. And here, typically, this would have been a driver self-nominating himself for the Manscaped lawnmower moment of the race as well. So I don't know, just so many thoughts. And there are parts of me where I feel cheated. There are parts of me where I feel Lewis Hamilton had the guts to walk around and say money talks, and that's why we had the farcical show, I would say, that we had on broadcast today. Of course, at no point when I say this do I mean that yes, it was safe enough to go racing, but maybe they could have done a little differently. And also another part of my mind also wonders, could this have been Lando Norris's pole position and race win? That's what he's going to be thinking all along, right? And then maybe even George Russell's. I mean, he finished P2, and you take it when it comes your way. But he was on provisional pole for maybe half a minute or something. What if he would have just been on pole? He would have won in Williams. So lots of thoughts. And even though we didn't have a Grand Prix, we're going to have a full Grand Prix length episode. I'm pretty sure of that.
I think it's crazy, right? You mentioned only a couple of rounds ago, Kunal, that controversy draws people in. And this is controversial in many ways. This has a lot to talk about. So don't be surprised by that length. But we'll try and keep it short. We'll try and keep it concise. But very firstly, let's just talk about this, right? Could the FIA have done anything different? Now, it really helps to have you on, Kunal. Of course, in your role with VIA Sport Network in Norway, you mentioned Hamilton going around saying money talks, and the money comes from companies, say, like VIA Sport, the one you work for. As a broadcaster, what was this like all about? Because seriously, it might be beneficial just to have a two-car race and just to classify and quote-unquote just to tick the check boxes, not check the tech boxes, but yes, basically doing that to just get the broadcaster's contract filled out. But really, it's a lot of money lost for the broadcaster still anyway, isn't there?
Well, okay, so controversy, and I'm going to try and stroke that a little bit more. And guys, the original idea of the title of this podcast was Michael Messi. Literally, that was what we were going to put it. But then Soumil and I thought maybe we're being too harsh on one gentleman
Yeah.
just because he's the public face of the FIA and the one who's on radio, one whose radio messages we absolutely love for the clarity he offers and so on, right?
Yeah.
But that's one thing. It's of course not just Michael Messi or Michael Masi as he's known. And talking about broadcasters, talking about money talks and so on, this is in no ways an official statement or an official stance, right? But the question that came into my mind was, did we really need to wait 3.5 hours to have 2 laps behind the safety car just so that half the points could have been awarded, right? Imagine Soumil when they did the first formation lap. What if they had just finished 2 laps at that time itself, right?
Yeah.
Then technically they would have done 2 laps, which would have been enough to award half points 10 minutes into the start of the race before the race start sequence was suspended. So we would have technically waited 3.5 hours or something, only be told that, guys, there is no race happening. Race is now suspended. And, we can all just go home. So, of course, I'm sure a lot of decisions here were taken with regards to a lot of contracts that Formula One is bound by, right? And my mind goes back just recently to the 2020 Australian Grand Prix, because it was after the official start time of FP1 on Friday did they actually go ahead and cancel the race, right? So pretty sure there were contracts, not just broadcasters, even the organizers on ground, even with regards to fans and the refund given, that were all taken into consideration that, okay, we are going to try and do what it takes to let the race happen. So none of the insurance clauses kick in. None of the people start protesting around, hey, but did you try enough to have a race, for example, right? And I was asked on Twitter, and sorry if this is becoming a monologue, but it's just one of those lengthy points that you'll hear me speak about. So I was even asked on Twitter, could we actually race on Monday? And the truth is, we've seen races happen on Monday in the past. We've seen races happen on Saturday in the past, right? But we are in such a hyper-connected world, right, that for the race to happen on a Monday, there are so many millions of factors to come into play, apart from the fact that Sunfoot is, less than 5 days away. So, of course, one of the things that came up was, would marshals be available?
Yeah.
But not just that. What about fans who turn around and say, hey, I've paid money for a Sunday. Why are you giving me the race on a Monday? What about the fact that, I traveled to the Belgian Grand Prix. I've been there for the last 3 years. You check out on the Sunday and then you go to the race, and after the race, you fly back home. So lots of logistical considerations behind which even having a full race on Monday probably did not fructify, right? And I would have loved to see a Grand Prix on a Monday, on a weekday, to see how that impacts things. And again, imagine the broadcasters itself. Suddenly you are told, here's a live feed for the race for tomorrow at 3 p.m. Figure it out, right? So lots of decision making. And in the end, it was just probably like, let's blame it on the weather. Let's just go around and say, we tried. Let's have everyone see visually, we've tried. And then let's do it. So that's definitely where my stance somewhere is. So could the FIA have done differently? Maybe not. Maybe their hands are tied as well. But I don't think making fans wait 3.5 hours just to see 2 laps behind a safety car and then classify that as a Grand Prix and award half points for no race.
Thank goodness Manchester United were
15
playing.
minutes.
Nah, you were fine. That was a good point, though. It helps that Man United were playing. Again, that's my point. But later on, what I mean to say is 1972 Spanish Grand Prix. Sundaram has pulled out this stat. That was the last time Formula One raced on a Monday. Not my stat. Sundaram's. He's just crazy with that. But coming back to the point, what we mean to say is, imagine a Formula One race on a Monday. I know a certain Indian broadcaster would mind, because how would they show their old cricket match highlights from 10 years ago then? Coming back to the whole show then, was it genuinely too unsafe, Kunal? Now, I've got a word on this. Now, lots of thoughts going on. Lots of people saying that, of course, Formula One was in unsafer situations previously. Again, you think of European GP 2007. Again, that was red flag. But we've seen worse days in terms of bad weather where visibility was bad. But I think the reason why this genuinely wasn't unsafe is, what if there was a scenario, right? And when you cancel a race, you have to go into these what if hypothetical circumstances, because it may generally look safe, but there is something that could really happen that could change things up. So imagine, Eau Rouge, you're going on top of it, there are puddles, there's a really wet track. What if somebody crashes over there, hits those barriers that we have seen are terrible at absorbing the impact? The tire barriers on the outside of Eau Rouge just give it back. Unfortunately, what happened with Jack Aitken was the same thing. What we saw in the W Series was the same thing. What we saw with Lando Norris was the same thing. And I hate to say this, but sadly, what happened with Antoine Hubert was also the same thing. It's wet, the visibility is limited. What if somebody comes in, blindly plows into your 300 kilometers per hour? That is a dangerous sight, Kunal. And it's these sort of hypothetical what-if circumstances that makes it unsafe to race. It's not just, okay, well, yeah, we've raced in tougher situations before. What if something happens like that?
No, absolutely. At no point am I or you or anyone from our team turning around to say that, hey, the race could have gone on and it was safe enough to drive on.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that it was unsafe, right? It's more just to the fact that we probably knew at some point that maybe just they were going to run 2 laps behind the safety car and call this an end. And I don't think they should have waited. They could have waited, but they had to wait 3.5 hours to take that decision. And of course, the medical car, we saw Alan van der Merwe push. We saw him have some moments where he was wobbling around and going off track and so on, right? But anyway, it's done. What's done is done. Maybe the podcast now and the video we are doing is more entertaining than the race in itself. But that's where we suddenly are. And I have to put in a word here is the Pirelli tires, the extreme wets. Some drivers actually pointed out again saying that the extreme wets were slow and they're not capable of handling these extreme wet conditions. And in the past, that's one of the things that I've noticed it, at least in my opinion, we've had wetter races, right?
Yeah.
Those races you could go racing because the extreme wet weather tire could actually handle those kind of conditions. We were in a qualifying session yesterday where Max Verstappen turned around and said that the wet weather tire couldn't handle all the standing water on track as well as the intermediate tire. And that's why, despite the conditions being for wet weather tires, the drivers actually chose to go out on the intermediate tires in qualifying. So a question here also has to be asked is, when will we get Pirelli to give us perfect wet weather tires to go racing on as well? Because remember, guys, that's also add to safety. If Pirelli are able to give tires that can race in such conditions, maybe we could have had a couple of laps of race. Of course, not denying the fact that even visibility was a challenge in the race today, not just the wet weather conditions.
Do it like the 80s. Have individual tire manufacturers for each team. If you've got wet with the tires, you can go ahead and you can race. Just kidding. I know that isn't just practical at all. Let's not spend any more time on that. Let's ask another question that's genuinely been trending everywhere on Twitter. Half points for no race. Does this even make any sense? Now, there's this ad campaign by a chocolate company in India, which basically has the tagline, sometimes you've got to try and do nothing. George Russell has got a podium in the most George Russell format, Kunal. You just see shenanigans happening around him all the time where his teammate gets points first or something or the other happens, or when he's got a legitimate chance of winning the race, his pit stop cycle just ends up breaking off at Mercedes. Something or the other happens, but this is the most remarkable podium you could ever ask for, but still not ask for. I don't even get what's going on now.
It was life's way of just rewarding George Russell for all the, all the tough races he's had at Williams, and for all the question marks about will he still be promoted or is he going to be stuck at Williams in 2022 as well. Maybe it was just life's way of promoting. Or life's way of telling George, here's a reward, just keep it. You deserve the podium at some point in Formula One, right? I'm going to just step back one more point because we spoke about half points, no race. Confusing, right? That's just how the rules of Formula One are. And, something Pablo Eliza, they tweeted on Twitter saying, if the race was red flagged after 2 laps, the last lap is actually counted as null and void. So technically they had a 1-lap race.
Wow.
In which case, did the drivers do enough number of laps for this to be considered as an official race result? Of course, nobody's going to talk about it, but Pablo Eliza, they tweeted about it. And I loved the whole confusion. had the race started at all? Could, Checo Perez have joined? And if the race hadn't started, the race clock had started, right?
Yeah.
And then the race clock had miraculously been stopped at 1700 hours local time because of force majeure. And if the race hadn't started, which was what we had, what we were told, that, hey guys, the race hasn't started, why did the message come saying the race is now going to resume? So lots of
Yeah.
funny situations. And that's why I loved the whole title, Michael Messi, that came around. And next time somebody asks me a rule of Formula One, a sporting or a technical rule of Formula One, and I do not know it by heart, and I refer to the rule book, you guys better not judge me for doing that, because Michael Masi, the man who's running it for FIA, he, poor chap, had to keep going back and forth with the rule book to come up with decisions today. So I'm just a podcaster. I'm allowed this liberty, Soumil.
Guys, that's why take a second before saying something. I mean, who am I to say it? I always end up fumbling when I say my words, but take a second and revert and check what you're saying is actually correct before going on and saying something. Madness. I love it. I absolutely do. But this is just outstanding, Kunal. Half points. I think last time we got it was Malaysia 2009. Rarely ever happens in the world of Formula One, and it's opened up quite a few doors now.
Well, it has. I was listening on Fernando Alonso's, press conference, not press, media interaction after, and he actually finished P11, and he was extremely upset that half points were awarded for no laps of racing. He actually said, I wasn't given a single lap to go racing and try and fight for points. Of course, not a quote unquote, you can go read, I've tweeted his interview out, but he actually said that I had no laps to go racing to try and get into the top 10. And that is so true. And for all you guys and girls who have OCD, please do not look at the Drivers' Championship table, because you have Max Verstappen, Lewis Hamilton, and Carlos Sainz Jr. with a 0.5. There's a decimal in their championship points table, which is going to be till the end of the season. And since Lewis and Max both have a 0.5, Soumil, there is no way that the 2021 Drivers' Championship is going to be settled by half a point of an advantage, however unfortunate that may sound.
Yeah, exactly. I was having memories of 1984, just watching all those documentaries and just craziness. What a good time. But let's actually focus on something else now. I think we have had enough of that. Let's focus on some stats. And you might be wondering, Soumil, yeah, man, how can you have stats from this? But it's the controversial races, again, see, take a second before speaking. They are the ones with the best and the craziest stats. Sundaram's come right here, and he's got one of his best stats reviews I have ever heard or listened to. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get straight down into it. Here is the stats review by Sundaram coming up.
Hey guys, it's time for the stats review of that Belgian Grand Prix. Now, I know we didn't get a race as such. The drivers didn't manage to fight it out. Unfortunately, it's a bit of a shame. But still, we did have a race classification and points were handed out to teams and drivers. So we do have quite a few stats and facts from this race, from that ultra short race. So yeah, it's time to do the review. So first up, like I mentioned, was a very short race and the shortest ever in Formula One history. 4 laps in just 28 kilometers completed. Special thanks to Belgium's extra long circuit for that. But yeah, just 28 kilometers of race distance, and that's the shortest ever F1 race. The previous one was back 30 years ago in the 1991 Australian Grand Prix, another race that was heavily affected with rain, and that race lasted just 52.92 kilometers. So a bit of an unwanted tag, but that's that. These sort of races tend to have few of these unwanted records anyway. And half points were awarded out to all the teams. So this is the 6th time that in F1 history that half points have been awarded in a race. The last time that happened was the 2009 Malaysian Grand Prix. Max Verstappen was the race winner today. This is his 16th race victory in Formula One, and he is now tied with the great Sterling Moss to take the most race wins without ever winning the Drivers' Championship. Now, Sterling Moss was often called the best driver to never win a championship. I really hope Max Verstappen is not the best modern driver to never win a championship. So he's currently on 16 race wins, and hopefully he'll have quite a few this year as well. Honda finally win at the Belgian Grand Prix after 30 long years. Now, something very interesting is that whenever they've won the Belgian Grand Prix as an engine supplier, their respective customer team has gone on to win the constructors title that year. So in 1986, it was Williams Honda that won in Belgium, and they were the constructors champions that year. And from 1988 to 1991, it was McLaren Honda who were victorious at the Belgian Grand Prix, and eventually they took the constructors title as well. Will Red Bull take that this year? I would like that. I would like that trend to continue. So let's see how that goes. All right, so let's talk about George Russell taking P2. I know everyone is celebrating his P2 finish today. I think he put in a splendid lap yesterday during qualifying. So this is Williams' first podium since the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in 2017, and this is their best race finish since 2014 in the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Now that race was a race with double points, and today's race was a race with half points. So a bit of a points multiplier going on with Williams whenever they take P2 recently. And very interestingly, George Russell has the same amount of P2 finishes this year as Valtteri Bottas. Yeah, they're pretty even Stevens there. And lastly, I would like to say that although I'm very, very happy for George Russell taking P2 today, and I think he's really, really deserved it. He has that potential. I'm just as gutted for Lando Norris because Sebastian Vettel was calling out for the red flag yesterday, and unfortunately, it wasn't waved by the stewards. And unfortunately, Lando Norris crashed out, but he definitely had the pace to take pole yesterday. And if he was on pole, it would have been his victory today. And I very recently spoke about hoping to see Lando Norris on the top step of the podium. That could have happened today. But yeah, that's all in hindsight. But very happy for George Russell. And yes, that was the stats review of the Belgian Grand Prix. I'll catch you guys for the Dutch Grand Prix.
I never thought that the record of the 1993 Australian GP would ever be broken, but here we are today. But there's also such a fun point that Sundaram mentioned about Constructors' Championship. Honda's omens looking very good for this year for Red Bull Racing. We shall see. But Kunal, before we head off, there is a very fun point we have to discuss. It's more about entertainment ideas for long breaks like this. I know, it's a fun way to end, but I think we've had 3 such big breaks in the last 6-7 odd years. Why don't you go ahead first? What are the few ideas that you've got in mind of what we should do in breaks like this one?
Wow. My mind is buzzing. I actually put out a tweet in the middle of all the 4 hours of waiting that we all did. Got lots of responses. So thank you everyone for sending responses. Specifically to Rana for all the love that she's showered for the work that we do on the podcast and for the Pits to Podium YouTube channel, Soumil, right? So I asked saying, okay, there's a long break. Everyone's waiting to be entertained. There are no cars racing on track.
Yeah.
What is it that Formula One could do to keep us entertained? And this is more than just those, paper boats and those ducks and stuff that we've normally seen, the crew play around with in the pit lane. And it's easier to do that when it's Friday practice. But, in the race, everyone's just ready because, hey, the FIA gives you a 10-minute signal and boom, you're back in race mode, right? So some of the best ones that came my way is maybe let the drivers go have a bicycle race around since they're pretty much bicycling during a track walk. My favorite was just put Toto Wolff and Christian Horner in the boxing ring. Let them box it out with each other. There was another one which was just put Sebastian Vettel, give him a mic and tell him to speak about sustainability and environmental damage and so on, right? And then there was, another one. Since we are about Michael Messi, we should have just got Michael Messi to explain the rule book of Formula One without having the rule book in his hands, right? And one of the most attended sessions, in my view, would have been Raikkonen and Alonso actually narrating stories of their battles with the great Michael Schumacher. So lots of things, Soumil. Do you have any ideas?
I'm sure Raikkonen would have narrated. He was just like, yeah, I went side by side. And, there's that. Alonso would have had a good time. I can tell you this. I jotted down a couple. Alonso teaching us how not to cut a chicken. Lando and George Charles on F1 2021. I think we've seen that enough. That's a bit of a dull one. Romain Grosjean was around. Maybe Romain Grosjean showing us how to juggle with fire. That is one thing he's been pretty good at. Latifi showcasing his Nutella collection because apparently he's got quite a good one. And chocolate in Belgium is quite good, I've heard from my friends. So there's one thing. And finally, best for last, Gunther Steiner and Yuki Tsunoda having a swearing competition. Who wouldn't love to hear that? Again, not moms, not moms, or parents. You get the idea.
I think I totally. That's unbeatable. That is. I was going to suggest something very blah, which is get the medical and the safety car drivers to just go race
that's
each
a
other.
good idea,
two cars on track. I mean, it's always assumed that when those two cars are on track, it's safe enough for us to go racing. So just have the two cars that's safe enough. And then the most obvious one at the last that I was going to say was a lot of Formula One drivers have showcased musical talents. Lewis and Charles play the piano. I know Adrian Sutil has played the piano as well. Then they can just sort of start a boy band and start entertaining us. I know Eddie Jordan plays the drums. He always wanted to play the drums at the Force India gatherings that we had at the at the factory during the British Grand Prix. So lots of ideas. Thank you so much everyone for sending them in. And everyone just wanted to engage and entertain. And Soumil, actually a note of thanks for all all the fellow commentators and studio personnel, everyone involved in broadcast around the world, because it's easy for us to just keep looking at pictures and be like, something's going to happen, maybe go take a break. Then when the FIA shows the race control message saying update in 15 minutes, you go take a break. But people involved in broadcast were there for whole race duration. Most networks also having pre-race shows and pre-race programming that go. And everyone involved had just one duty: to keep having a fun chat, to keep fans engaged, entertained, and informed. So hats off to all you guys who keep commentating on races, even when there is no race.
Exactly. What a job they've done. Again, you get paid to speak about the sport. You love it so much. It's a hard situation, I can tell you that. But that is some crazy stuff. And it's a good time to end. But you mentioned about drivers entertaining, about singing. Do this when you're free. Elio De Angelis, South African Grand Prix, 1980, drivers strike. Not 80. 1 second. When did they have the strike? When now Lauda was back. 1982 South African Grand Prix, Elio De Angelis. Read and you will love it. But that, folks, is it for us today right here for not the Belgium Grand Prix race review here on the Inside Line F1 podcast and Pits To Podium. I hope you had a more fun time listening to this and watching this than watching the race. It's a given. But still, I hope you had a good time, folks. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you so much for being a part of this canal. You know the deal. We shall see you next time out for the Italian GP preview right here. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. By the way, there's Zandvoort next, but I pardon you for
Zandvoort. There we are.
All the calendar confusion that happened. So thank you very much, Soumil, and see you guys in a couple of days.
See you.